But beneath the walls of Greymire Manor lies a darkness older than memory, a thread of pain and silence woven through every generation of the Harrow bloodline. When Edward returns home, seeking answers about his vanished mother and the shadowed past his father fled, he finds more than secrets. He finds a legacy that demands sacrifice, a restless voice that calls from the depths of a forgotten well, and a portrait that watches with eyes that never blink. In a house where love and horror bleed into one another, Edward must face a choice. No son should burst to save his family, or be consumed by the darkness that waits patiently for its keeper, because some wounds never heal, and some promises are written in blood. The news of my inheritance came by letter-stiff parchment, sealed with dark red wax and bearing the insignia of a family name I scarcely recalled. It arrived one dull September morning, as London hung beneath a sky the color of tarnished silver, and I, Edward Harrow, sat by the fire, drinking the last of my tea in a boarding house I could ill afford. The letter was from a solicitor in Shropshire, Mr. Aldous Price, informing me of the death of one Lord Alaricaro, great-uncle I had never met, and of my sudden entitlement to his estate, Greymire House. There was no mention of the manner of his death, nor of any other living relatives. As far as the law was concerned, I was the last of the Harrows. I was stunned. I had lived frugally, almost invisibly, since my father's death 10 years prior, and had no expectation of fortune. The Harrows, I'd been told, were a family best. Forgotten, eccentric, cursed, or both. My mother, a dour woman from Newcastle, spoke rarely of them, and never fondly. But poverty breeds acceptance of mystery. Within the week, I packed what few belongings I owned and boarded a train north, leaving behind the grey reek of London for the unknown hush of the countryside, the final leg of the journey. A carriage ride from the Shropshire station wound through lonely woods and sodden fields. The driver, a leathery man with too few teeth, said little, but at the mention of Greymire House, he crossed himself and muttered, "Bad place, sir, not meant to be lived in." When I pressed him, he shook his head. They say the old lord never left his study. No servants but one. And the girl, God preserve her soul, she was the last before it all went quiet. The girl. I asked, but he only grunted, spat out the window, and drove on. It was near dusk when we reached the gates. Greymire House loomed on a rise cut in black stone, entangled in creeping ivy. The Rotterine gates shrieked as we passed through. The grounds were unkempt, the garden long strangled by weeds, and an oppressive quiet pressed upon the land, as if the very air had grown tired of noise. Bledsoe. The caretaker awaited me at the main doors. He was a stooped man of indeterminate age, his coat too large for his frame, and his eyes milky with cataracts. He spoke not a word, only nodded, and handed me a single brass key ornate, tarnished with green. Then, without even a glance at the house, he turned and vanished into the trees. I stood there for a moment, alone at the threshold. The front doors rose twice my height, dark oak carved with thorned vines and winged beasts. A click that echoed like a gunshot, and stepped inside. The foyer was vast, shadowed, and still. The only light came from the waning sky behind me. Grand staircase rose before me, draped in a threadbare red runner. Dust choked the air. The scent was unmistakable mold, old stone, and something sweetly decayed, like rotting flowers in a sealed room. I lit a candle from the wall sconce and explored the lower level. Every room seemed suspended in time, a dining hall with a long table set for guests who would never come, a library with cracked leather chairs and books furred in gray dust, and a drawing room where portraits hung in faded gloom, their eyes glinting with the oily sheen of forgotten secrets. But it was in the study that I first saw her. The room was dark-paneled, lined with books, and a cold fireplace choked with ashes. Above the mantel hung a large oval portrait in a gilded frame. It was a woman, pale, austere, and unsmiling. She wore a high-necked black dress with jet buttons and a mourning veil pushed back to reveal a face that was strikingly beautiful, yet entirely without warmth. Her eyes, gray as smoke, seemed to look through the viewer rather than at them. The painter's skill was undeniable, and the effect was unsettling. Beneath the portrait, small brass plaque read, Lenora Harrow, 1842 to 1863, a Harrow 21, at death. There was no record of her in the papers I'd been given, and no mention in my family's sparse genealogies. Yet here she was, mortalized in oils. Haunting the heart of the house, the bottom right corner of the canvas was singed. The damage subtle but deliberate, as though someone had once tried to destroy it, but relented at the last moment. The frame bore scratches, and beneath the painting, I noticed a faint mark on the wood paneling, finger-length gouges, as if made by nails. I turned away then, uneasy, and made for the upstairs chambers. The first bedroom I found was prepared with clean sheets, a fire already laid, and my bags beside the bed. Bledsoe must have been inside while I was downstairs. That night, sleep was slow to find me. The wind clawed at the shutters, and the silence within the house was deep, so deep that I fancied I could hear my own heartbeat echo off the walls. At one point I thought I heard footsteps above me. No. But I knew the attic had been sealed. In the final hour before sleep, I dreamed, or believed I dreamed, of a woman standing at the end of my bed. She did not speak, nor move, but watched me, with eyes like painted stone. When I awoke, the fire had gone cold, and the door to my chamber, which I had locked, stood slightly ajar, downstairs. The portrait was still warm to the touch. The morning brought little relief from the strange unease that had settled in my bones. Sunlight, if it could be called that, fell in thin gray shafts through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the floorboards of Graymire House. The gloom did not lift with the day. Rather, it seemed to rearrange itself, moving from corner to corner like a living thing. I breakfasted alone in the cold dining hall. The room was vast and echoing, filled with antique chairs and a table that might seat 20. At the far end, a pair of candlesticks flickered as if caught in some unseen draught, though every window was tightly shut. The food bread, tea, and a boiled egg had been prepared before I awoke. It sat neatly arranged on a silver tray that bore the family crest, a hound beneath a crescent moon. I hadn't heard a soul stir, nor had I seen any sign of Bledsoe since his silent welcome the night before. Curious, I set out to find him. The rear corridors of Graymire were even more forbidding than the front. Narrow and lined with portraits of somber ancestors whose names had been lost to time. The walls bore the faint imprint of where furniture had once stood, now removed or rotted away. I found the servants' quarters behind the kitchen, small and unlit. Dust lay thick across the floor. The bed was untouched. A single wardrobe stood open, empty, save for a moth-eaten coat. A shaving mirror cracked down the center leaned on the wash basin. There was no sign of occupation. I returned to the main halls and called out, "Mr. Bledsoe?" No reply. Only the faint creak of wood settling in the bones of the old house. I did not see Bledsoe again that day, nor the next, but the meals continued to appear, always quietly, always warm. On the third evening, I found myself once more in the study. The fire was lit when I arrived, though I had given no instruction, and the room was warm, almost inviting. The portrait of Lenora Harrow loomed above the hearth, watching. I stared at her for a long time. There was something uncanny in the way her likeness had been captured. Not merely the accuracy, but the intent. The painter had not sought to flatter her, but to reveal some inner truth that unsettled. The soul? She was beautiful, yes, but in the way a thunderstorm might be beautiful. A thing meant to be observed from a distance. I searched the bookshelves, hoping for a diary or a family ledger that might shed light on her story. Most volumes were religious texts, histories, or Latin treatises on philosophy. Dust coated them thickly. One book, however, caught my eye. It was smaller than the rest, bound in deep blue leather, with no title on the spine. Inside it was handwritten. The ink had faded, but the penmanship was sharp, deliberate. A journal that the first page read simply, "This account is kept in secrecy for the sake of those who remain. Should it be found, let it be known. Some spirits do not rest, and some sins do not fade." The entries were brief, dated sporadically, though they were written by Lord Alaric himself. August 3rd, she walks the halls again. Only at night. A mirror in the east wing cracked without cause. I heard her whispering through the fireplace. Grating, August 17th, I burned the portrait once more. Still it returns. Always above the hearth, always warm to the touch. I believe now that she sees me. I believe she knows. September 1st, Bledsoe says he saw her standing at the edge of the garden. She did not move. He refused to enter the house. For 3 nights, I fear it is not enough. October 9th, I have made arrangements. The solicitor will find Edward, the last of us. He must decide what is to be done. Perhaps the house will listen to new blood. I closed the journal with trembling hands, so it had not been an accident that the house was left to me. Alaric had known. He had chosen me for reasons unstated, perhaps because there was no one else, or perhaps because he could not escape it himself. I looked up. The portrait was still there, but something had changed. Where once her eyes had stared fixedly ahead, now they seemed to glance ever so slightly downward as though meeting mine. I stepped closer, my heart drumming in my chest. It was surely a trick of the light. The fire flickered behind me, casting soft shadows that warped the canvas. I reached up to touch the frame and felt heat, not the warmth of nearby flame, but a deeper heat, like something alive pulsing behind the paint. I snatched my hand away. Then, from upstairs, came a sound footsteps, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably. Pumna. They moved from one end of the hall above to the other, then stopped. Then came again, slower now, as if the walker were burdened or unwell, and then the soft creak of a door opening. I backed out of the study and climbed the stairs, candle in hand, though every instinct warned me against it. The upper hallway stretched into darkness. Cold air spilled from one of the rooms, the last on the right, the door slightly ajar. I approached with quiet steps. Inside was the nursery. Dust lay thick over a crib, a rocking chair, and shelves of long-forgotten toys. The air was heavy, as though the room had not been disturbed in decades. But the rocking chair moved. Not much. A gentle sway. Back and forth. Back and forth. And there, nestled in the folds of an old quilt, was a single black thread, curled tightly, like something once stitched, now torn loose. I stood at the nursery threshold, the silence of the house pressing in like a held breath. The black thread on the blanket was thin, coarse, and curled in a tiny spiral, no longer than a matchstick. Yet it exuded a peculiar wrongness, as if it belonged to something intimate, something that should never have been removed. I did not touch it. Instead, I turned and closed the nursery door, leaving the chair to rock in the dark. That night, I bolted the door to my chamber and placed a chair against the knob for good measure. The fire burned low, but I did not sleep. Instead, I sat with Lord Alaric's journal, poring through each trembling page under candlelight. His descent was slow, but unmistakable. October 17th. The dreams are louder now. I hear her weeping beneath the floorboards. She calls my name. Through the grates, the servants think I am mad, but Bledsoe knows. He has seen her. He saw what she did to the girl. October 20th, the child was never baptized. She was born in grief, died in shadow. Lenora would not release her even in death. There is a tie between them. I saw it once, when I walked past the nursery, thread black as coal trailing from the cradle to the portrait. The thread returned to the line again and again, my eyes tracing it as though they could unravel it from the page. A thread trailing from the cradle to the portrait, but how? The nursery was on the second floor, study was below. Unless I set the journal down and walked softly to the far wall of my chamber. There behind a faded tapestry I discovered what I half hoped not to find, a narrow stairwell spiraling down between the walls of the house. Steep and tight, meant for servants long gone, it led, I suspected, directly to the study. I took a candle and descended. The passage stank of old stone and mildew. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the air became, until I reached a small wooden door, barely higher than my chest. I pushed. It opened and found myself behind the bookshelf in the study. The fire had burned out, and the room was still. The portrait hung above the hearth, unchanged. Or so I thought. Then I noticed it. Another thread, just below the frame, barely visible against the black of Lenora's painted dress. A length of black thread dangled loosely. It swayed slightly, though there was no wind, no draft, no movement in the room. This time I touched it. The thread was warm, not with the heat of flame, but of blood, of breath. And as I grasped it gently, I felt a shiver course up my arm, not from cold, but from memory. A memory not my own. A woman young, screaming in silence as her mouth was sewn shut with fine, black thread. A cradle overturned. Ash on a white dress. I let go. The thread retracted into the painting like a spider drawing its web. My heart thundered in my chest, and I stumbled back into the bookshelf, knocking a volume loose. It hit the floor with a dull thud, sound strangely final. The book was a ledger, thin and leather-bound. It contained household records written in a cramped, angular hand. Births, deaths, staff names, expenditures. On the last page, scrawled, as though in haste, was an unfamiliar entry. Lenora's child buried in the garden north side, beneath the stone angel. No marker, no rites, no rest. A chill swept through me. The next morning, gray and brittle with frost. I searched the north garden. It was wild with thorns and dead ivy, but among the brambles stood a small statuine angel, wings broken, face weathered smooth by rain and time. At its base the earth was undisturbed but oddly soft. The ground had sunk slightly, as though something beneath it had shifted. I returned with a spade. The digging was slow. Roots snagged and fought me, and the cold bit at my fingers. After what felt like hours, I struck wood. A box small, rotted, and barely held together. I hesitated. Then I opened it. Inside lay the remains of a child's toy cloth doll. Brittle with age, its face hand-stitched and worn blank by decay. And beside it, wrapped in yellowed linen, a lock of hair, pale, curled, and beneath that, a note, "Forgive me." She would not let her go. That night I did not light a fire. Asterisk, I sat in the study once more. The journal on my lap, the box at my feet. The portrait watched me in silence. I thought I saw the corners of Lenora's mouth twist ever so slightly, as if drawn by some secret thought. At midnight I heard the footsteps again. This time, They descended from above, not, as before, slow and singular, but in two sets. One light and uneven, the other barely audible, as though made by feet that no longer touched the ground. They stopped at the study door. It opened. There, in the doorway, stood a woman in mourning black, her veil drawn over her face. Her eyes were gray fire beneath the lace. And beside her, floating slightly above the ground, was the figure of a child, thin, blurred at the edges, face obscured by hair like spun silk. Lenora raised her hand, pointing at the box beside me. I understood then, not yet, not like this. I took the doll and the lock of hair and carried them to the hearth. As I placed them into the cold ashes and struck the match, I saw Lenora lower her hand. The fire hissed and caught. Flames danced silently. The child vanished. First, Lenora remained a moment longer, and then, the flicker like wind in a candle, she was gone. I looked to the portrait, still silent, unchanged. But this time, she was smiling. The morning after the fire in the hearth, the house felt still, not the oppressive, breathless stillness I had grown used to, but something lighter, as though a long-held tension had been, if not lifted, then lessened. The shadows remained, the dust unchanged, but the silence no longer threatened to swallow every sound. I barely slept the night before. I had watched the flames burn down to ash, watched the last threads of the doll curl and blacken. When the fire died, I waited for Lenora to return, for the child's ghost to weep once more. But nothing came, just silence, in an odd peace. Still, I did not delude myself. The house was not finished with me. It never is. In places like this, I spent the morning exploring the western wing, a part of Graymire I had left untouched. It was colder there. The walls bore strange watermarks like spreading hands, and the floor sagged slightly beneath each step. I passed through a music room where an old harpsichord sat under a tattered sheet, its keys stained and warped, and a breakfast room whose windows were boarded from the inside. At the end of the hall, I found a locked door. The key was still in the lock. It turned stiffly, protesting as if the door had been closed for centuries. Beyond was a staircase that spiraled. Down into darkness, the air shifted, cold and sharp with the scent of old stone. A cellar. No doubt, though this house had many names for its secrets. I fetched a lantern. The stairs descended deeper than I expected. The stone steps slick with moisture. At the bottom I found a wide chamber, half hewn from bedrock, half constructed with ancient brick. Shelves lined the walls, filled with bottles of spoiled wine and boxes of rotting paper. In the center stood something unexpected. A well dry, perhaps, though I couldn't see the bottom. It yawned wide and black beneath a low arch of stone. A ring of iron circled its mouth, and a rusted winch sat beside it, attached to a length of heavy chain. Beside the well, embedded in the wall, was a brass plate covered in grime. I wiped it clean. The mouth is closed, but the voice remains. The words sent a chill across my back. I leaned slightly over the lip of the well, raising the lantern. The light reached only so far before being swallowed whole. I dropped a pebble. No splash. No thud. Just endless dark, and then a whisper. Not from below, from behind me. I turned sharply, as the lantern swinging in a wide arc, scattering shadows against the wall. No one was there, but the whisper came again, this time in my ear, close and cold. He put her there. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the lantern. The well stood silent. The cellar offered no more answers that day. But I knew now that the story was not finished. Lenora's child had been buried, hidden, but someone else, someone whose voice still clung to the stone, remained. That evening, I returned to Lord Alaric's journal. I had thought I'd read it all, but tucked into the back cover, sealed with wax. I discovered a folded page. The wax had cracked with age, brittle and dry. I broke it. The writing was hurried, smeared in places. If you are reading this, you must understand what I could not say aloud. It was not Lenora who first brought ruin to Graumire. It was my father, Daniel. Harrow, he had a hunger for knowledge the church dared not name. Kept books beneath the house, books bound in flesh and sealed with salt. He believed he could master death itself. Lenora was but a girl when he first summoned it. A voice from the well, a promise. She heard it, she believed it. When the child was born, it was not wholly of this world. It cried only in mirrors. Its eyes reflected things behind you. The servants fled. Lenora changed. Her laughter vanished. She would sit for hours, whispering into the fireplace. I tried to burn the portrait. It always returned. I tried to bury the child. She would not let her rest. But the voice is still here. I hear it. In the walls, in the well, it calls to the blood. I sat in silence for a long time. A voice. A child not wholly human. A father who dabbled in forbidden rites in a house built around a wound that never healed. That night, I dreamed of water. Black water. Deep and still. Far beneath the stone. I stood at the well's edge, staring into it, and saw a face rise from the depths, not Lenora's, not the child's, but something older. Its eyes were holes, and its mouth was stitched with black thread. It whispered, "One has been taken. One must remain." I awoke in a sweat. The fire guttered out. My bed sheets were damp. The air was thick, as though the house itself had begun to breathe around me, and then I noticed it. The portrait, it was no longer in the study. I found it at the top of the stairs, leaning against the wall just outside my chamber door. Still warm, still. Watching. But this time the expression had changed once more. No longer a smile now. It looked like grief. I did not touch the portrait. Its sudden migration from the study to the top of the stairs spoke volumes. Volumes I would have preferred remained unread. I stared at Lenora's painted face, now tinged not with malice, but sorrow. Her eyes were redrimmed, her expression drawn, almost pleading. Had it changed again? Or had I only begun to see it truly? I took a blanket from my room and covered the portrait, dragging it back to the study where it belonged. I faced it toward the wall, resting it on the hearth. As I did, the back of the canvas brushed my arm and it burned. Not with heat, but with a sensation like needles, sharp, icy, and pulsing. I dropped it. The portrait landed with a dull thud, and did not move again, but the house noticed. That night, the silence broke. It began around midnight, sound like soft weeping, distant and low, echoing through the floorboards. I rose from bed and listened. It came not from the halls or the nursery, but from somewhere. Below the grate, the large cast iron fireplace in the study had once connected to a network of ventilation flues. It's designed to carry heat through the house. But what I heard was no draft. It was a voice muffled, feminine, and near. I lit a candle and descended once more. The study was dark, the fire out. The covered portrait loomed in the hearth's glow, but I ignored it. I knelt by the fireplace and listened closely. "He never let me speak," the voice said. He stitched my mouth shut, but the fire carried my voice. I recoiled. They blamed her. It continued. But she was only trying to save me. The voice did not belong to Lenora. It was softer, more youthful. The child. He said I was a gift, but I was never meant to be. Asterisk, the grate pulsed slightly, as though the air behind it moved with breath. I placed my hand near it and felt warmth not from a fire, but from something deeper. Something alive suddenly. A whisper like wind through teeth. "Don't let him rise." I stumbled back. By morning, the portrait had returned to my door, uncovered. But the face had changed again. Now it showed Lenora with her eyes closed, not peaceful, resigned. The threads that once sealed her mouth were gone, but faint red lines traced her lips, as though even in death, silence had been stitched into her. I searched the house for signs of the father Nathaniel Harrow, the man Alaric had called the root of the rot. I began in the attic, a cramped and forgotten space thick with cobwebs and mouse droppings. There I found his study. A small locked door behind a false panel opened with the same ornate brass key Bledsoe had first given me. Inside was a low-ceilinged room of stone and dark wood, choked with books, jars, and dried herbs. Pentagrams had been etched into the stone floor, now faded. Candles melted down to wicks stood in rings of salt, and at the far end a desk, its drawers held old journals, most illegible, written in a cipher I could not understand. But one book entitled, its leather binding stiff with age, was written plainly in Nathaniel's hand. There is a well beneath the house that predates the foundation. The locals called it the throat. When we began construction, the builders found bones at its base. Not animal, not quite human. No. The earth was salted and sealed, but I knew what they did not. It is a gate. Waits behind it. I have heard it speak my name. I called to it. It answered in dreams. It gave me a daughter. Asterisk. The entries grew erratic after that. Ink blotted, words scrambled, symbols scrawled in the margins, repeated phrases. One taken, one left.
Ow.
The voice needs a host. Thread the mouth, close the gate. The bottom of the final page. When Lenora died, the bond frayed. But the girl was enough. Until now, the house knows. The portrait listens, the well waits. I closed the book with shaking hands. That night I heard laughter. It came from the nursery. I should have ignored it. I should have stayed in bed, wrapped in ignorance and blankets, but dread and duty drew me up like a puppet on strings. The nursery door was ajar. Candle in hand, I stepped inside. The rocking chair moved again, but not gently this time. It swayed, with force, as though an invisible child kicked its feet with glee, and then music. A lullaby. Drifting from the cracked music box on the WINDO Zeldel, I approached it. Slowly its lid was open, though I'd never touched it. Like a memory corrupted. As I reached to close it, the flame of my candle hissed and extinguished. Darkness swallowed the room. A cold hand touched mine. I screamed and stumbled back, relighting the candle with shaking fingers. No one was there, but the music box was closed. On its lid, carved crudely into the wood, was a new word that had not been there before. Stay. I barely slept the night before. I'd watched the flames burn down to ash, watched the last threads of the doll curl and blacken. When the fire died, I waited for Lenora to return, for the child's ghost to weep once more. But nothing came, just silence and an odd peace. Still, I did not delude myself. The house was not finished with me. It never is. But in places like this, I spent the morning exploring the western wing, a part of Graymire I had left untouched. It was colder there. The walls bore strange watermarks like spreading hands, and the floor sagged slightly beneath each step. I passed through a music room where an old harpsichord sat under a tattered sheet, its keys stained and warped, and a breakfast room whose windows were boarded from the inside. At the end of the hall, I found a locked door. The key was still in the lock. It turned stiffly, protesting as if the door had been closed for centuries. Beyond was a staircase that spiraled. Down into darkness, the air shifted, cold and sharp, with the scent of old stone. A cellar. No doubt, though, this house had many names for its secrets. I fetched a lantern. The stairs descended deeper than I expected, stone steps slick with moisture. At the bottom I found a wide chamber, half hewn from bedrock, half constructed with ancient brick. Shelves lined the walls, filled with bottles of spoiled wine and boxes of rotting paper. In the center stood something unexpected. A well dry, perhaps, though I couldn't see the bottom. It yawned wide and black beneath a low arch of stone. A ring of iron circled its mouth, and a rusted winch sat beside it, attached to a length of heavy chain. Beside the well, embedded in the wall, was a brass plate covered in grime. I wiped it clean, the mouth is closed. But the voice remains. The words sent a chill across my back. I leaned slightly over the lip of the well, raising the lantern. The light reached only so far before being swallowed whole. I dropped a pebble, no splash, no thud. Just endless dark, and then a whisper, not from below, from behind me. I turned sharply, the lantern swinging in a wide arc, scattering shadows against the wall. No one was there, but the whisper came again, this time in my ear, close and cold. He put her there. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the lantern. The well stood silent. The cellar offered no more answers that day. But I knew now that the story was not finished. Lenora's child had been buried, hidden. But someone else, someone whose voice still clung to the stone, remained. That evening, I returned to Lord Alaric's journal. I had thought I'd read it all, but tucked into the back cover, sealed. With wax, I discovered a folded page. The wax had cracked with age, brittle and dry. I broke it. The writing was hurried, smeared in places. If you're reading this, you must understand what I could not say aloud. It was not Lenora who first brought ruin to Graymire. It was my father, Nathaniel Harrow. He had a hunger for knowledge the church dared not name. Kept books beneath the house, books bound in flesh and sealed with salt. He believed he could. Mastered death itself. Lenora was but a girl when he first summoned it. A voice from the well, a promise. She heard it, and she believed it. When I returned to my chamber, the portrait waited for me. It hung now directly above the fireplace in my bedroom, the place I had left empty. Lenora's face was unchanged, but her hands had moved. One now extended outward, as if offering something in her painted palm, impossibly rendered in oil and shadow. It's a single black thread, real, dangling beyond the frame. Waiting, the thread trembled in the air. Suspended from Lenora's painted hand as if gravity held no sway. Over it, blacker than ink, it seemed to drink the light from my candle, pulling shadows toward it in long, spindly shapes. I did not move. Every instinct screamed to leave it untouched. But some deeper part of some ancestral compulsion buried in the marrow of my blood leaned closer. The Harrows, it seemed, were cursed not by chance, but by choice. I reached out and took the thread. It did not resist. It was warm in my hand, yet weightless, like holding the last breath of a dying dream. As I drew it away from the canvas, the oil around Lenora's hand peeled, paint cracking silently along her wrist and palm as if flesh and pigment were one. And then something pulled. The thread resisted. Lightly at first, then with growing strength. As though it stretched not from canvas to floor, but from this world into another. I tugged once, twice, then sharply. It came loose with a hiss, a sound not of tearing, but of exhalation, like breath through old lungs. Behind me, every candle in the room went out. The next morning, I woke with the thread still in my hand. It had looped itself around my wrist as I slept. The end coiled neatly in my palm and not tied in the shape of an eye. I untwisted it in silence and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. That day, the house was different. Awake. Doors I had never touched now stood open. A mirror that had always reflected only dust and shadows now showed flickers of motion behind me when I passed it. The hallways smelled of damp roses, as if something had walked through moments before I entered, and the whispers began again. They followed me in the walls, sometimes faint sobs, sometimes laughter. At one point, I heard the harpsichord in the music room play 2 soft notes before falling silent. But most disturbing of all was this. The portrait was gone, not in the study, not above the hearth, not in the nursery or stairwell. I searched the entire house, every wall, every hall, every locked drawer and hidden panel. Gone, and yet I could feel it. Watching it was Bledsoe, who returned that evening. I found him standing by the front doors, soaked from a storm I had not noticed, his hat in his hands, eyes downcast. He had not spoken to me since the day I arrived. Now, without a word, he handed me something wrapped in oilcloth. I unwrapped it slowly. It was a letter, addressed to me, written by my father. Asterisk Edward, if this reaches you, then you have entered Graymire. You were never meant to. Tried to keep you from this. Legacy this house. This blood but fate is cruel, and the past clings like cobwebs. I swore I'd never return after what happened to your mother, but listen to me now. The voice in the well lies. It offers comfort. Yes, it speaks with love, but it is not what it seems. It is not your ancestor. It is not your kin. It wears there. Faces burn the thread, and whatever you do, do not follow the portrait. Your father. Th asterisk. I stared at the letter for a long time. My father had been here. He knew he had tried to escape it, just as I had, but I was not sure if he had succeeded that night. I found the portrait again. It waited in the cellar, propped against the old dry well beneath the house. The air was thick with the scent of burning oil and wilted violets. Lenora's image had changed once more. She stood now, not seated, with her hand extended toward the well. Her face was gaunt, her mouth slightly parted, not stitched shut, but open as if mid-breath. In her hand another thread hung. A second offering, I held the first thread in my palm, feeling it vibrate like a tuning fork. Then I heard it from the well laughter. Not a child's, not a woman's. A voice made of echoes and wet stone, a voice too wide for a human throat. You have come far, Edward, it said, deep in syrup slow. But the house is further yet to show you. I turned. From the painting, that voice hissed again, lower now, one left, one taken. A harrow must remain. I dropped the thread. It slithered like a living thing toward the portrait's frame, coiling upward, until it disappeared into the painted folds of Lenora's dress. Then her eyes moved just a flicker, but enough. She did not smile. She winced, as if she were sorry for what would come next. The cellar felt like the heart of the house's secret stark, damp and pulsing with a cold life of its own. I left the portrait propped against the well and climbed the stairs, the echo of that unnatural laughter still ringing in my ears. The threads, the voice, the warnings, they all wove together into a tapestry. I had no choice but to unravel. The letter from my father lay heavy in my pocket. Burn the thread. But which one? The one I held, or the one still inside the painting? What if destroying one only strengthened the other? I needed answers, and the only place I had yet to fully explore was the garden, the north garden beneath. The broken stone angel. Earlier, I had uncovered the grave of Lenora's child, a shallow, soft spot under thorn and weed. The dirt still felt too warm, too recent, as if something restless slept beneath. In daylight, The angel appeared less mournful, its face weathered but resolute. I knelt before it and touched the cold stone, then laid my palm flat on the ground. Beside its base, the earth seemed to pulse faintly beneath my fingers. I dug once more carefully, deeper this time. The soil gave way easily, revealing a worn wooden box buried beneath the roots. I lifted it out and pried it open. Inside lay a folded bundle of parchment, tied with a faded ribbon and a small wooden comb carved with strange symbols. The parchment, brittle and yellowed, contained drawings and notes, part diary, part spellbook. The handwriting was rushed, almost frantic. Lenora's hand, realized. Her last words scrawled in ink that had bled with time. The voice from the well is not mine to command. He lies beneath the stone, waiting for a host to carry his hunger. The child I bore was half of him, half of me trapped in blood and shadow. I sealed her with thread, but the house remembers. The portrait watches and waits. I fear what will come when the thread is broken. I shuddered. The comb was heavier than it looked. The symbols carved into it pulsed faintly in my palm as I held it up to the light. Then I heard the garden behind me stir, rustling, as if the dead leaves themselves were whispering. I turned sharply, but no one stood there, only the angel still. But something had changed. A faint dark thread trailed from beneath its base, snaking into the earth like a vein. I tugged lightly. The thread was warm and alive, and it pulled me down. The thread pulled firmly in my grasp, as if eager to lead me somewhere. I hesitated only a moment before kneeling and following its trail beneath the stone angel. The earth was soft and damp, the garden's decay clinging to my fingers as I dug deeper. Hand over hand, the black thread disappearing beneath the soil. Deeper I dug, the colder the earth grew, until finally my fingers brushed against something solid. A cold metal ring, rusted and worn, embedded in a wooden trapdoor hidden beneath the roots. I grasped it and heaved upward. The hatch groaned and shifted, revealing a narrow passage that descended into darkness. My heart pounded as the air that spilled. Forth was thick with damp stone and something else, an ancient, sour scent that smelled like forgotten sins. I lit a lantern and stepped down. The stairs were hewn from rough stone, slick with moss and grime. The thread slipped from my fingers and vanished in the gloom below, but I kept moving forward, drawn deeper by a mixture of dread and curiosity at the bottom. I entered a low chamber, roughly circular, its walls carved with strange symbols that flickered in the lantern's light like a language older than any I'd seen. The floor was layered with dust and scattered bones, and in the center stood a stone altar, cracked and stained. I approached it cautiously. Etched into the altar was a figure, a woman, with closed eyes, her mouth stitched shut by thread, her hands reaching toward the sky. The image mirrored Lenora's portrait. Beneath the altar lay a shallow pit, covered by a thin slab of stone. I knelt and tried to move it, but it was heavy. Suddenly, I heard a whisper, soft, urgent from somewhere behind me. "Do not disturb." I froze. The voice was feminine but strained, desperate. I glanced around, the lantern casting flickering shadows that danced like ghosts. "The house will take." I looked back at the altar, the figure carved in stone seeming to stare directly at me. The air thickened. My breath caught. Something shifted in the shadows. I spun toward the wall and saw a shape, a faint outline of a child, translucent and shimmering, standing near the altar's edge. Its eyes were hollow, its mouth a thin line. I swallowed hard. "He binds me," the apparition whispered. "He takes and he waits. The well is his mouth, and the thread is his tongue." The child stepped closer, passing through me like mist. A coldness seeped from its form, chilling me to the bone. "You hold the thread," it said, voice trembling. "You can close the gate or open it." I nodded, gripping the lantern tighter. The voice continued, fading. "But beware the price. The house demands a keeper. One to stay, one to go." The apparition vanished. I sat back, shaking. The thread, my father's warning, everything made sense now. The well beneath the house was not just a physical gateway, but a prison for something ancient and hungry. Nathaniel Harrow had tried to control it through dark rites, sealing his sins and the restless spirit of Lenora's child beneath stone and thread. And now that bond had weakened. I rose and examined the altar's pit once more. With effort, I pried the slab loose. Beneath it lay a bundle wrapped in linen. Inside was a faded doll, the same doll I had burned weeks ago, blackened and cracked but still unmistakably the same. Wrapped around it was a length of the black thread. I held it carefully. The doll's cracked porcelain face seemed to watch me, its eyes shining with a terrible intelligence. The house groaned as if in pain. Suddenly a gust of wind swept through the chamber, snuffing out my lantern. Darkness swallowed me whole. In that darkness I heard the well's voice, again deep, guttural, endless. One left, one taken. My fingers tightened around the thread. I had a choice: bind the darkness once more, or break the cycle and face whatever came next. The chamber remained cloaked in darkness, the silence heavy and absolute after the well's voice faded. My breath echoed softly in the cold stone, and the cracked doll lay in my hands like a relic of a nightmare I wasn't sure I wanted to face. The black thread coiled around it like a serpent, as though alive and ready to lash out. The choice was clear, though no less terrifying: to bind the darkness once more, sealing it beneath stone and thread, sacrificing whatever part of myself the house demanded, or to break the bond and risk unleashing a hunger that had been sleeping for centuries. I pulled out the letter from my father again, his desperate handwriting blazing in my mind. Burn the thread. Did not follow the portrait, but I now knew. The thread was not just thread. It was a tie of bloodline, a curse, a gatekeeper's chain. And if I severed it without a plan, the consequences would be unthinkable. The doll's glassy eyes seemed to flicker in the faintest candlelight. I could coax from the damp walls. I needed knowledge. I needed power. I needed a way to protect myself and, perhaps finally, end this nightmare. I returned to the attic study, where Nathaniel Harrow's journals were scattered across a dust-coated desk. This time, I pored over the ciphered pages, searching for patterns in the arcane script. It was slow work, but I finally cracked a phrase repeated in the margins: Custos Tenebris, Latin for Keeper of Darkness. The ritual Nathaniel wrote of was chilling. To bind the entity within the well required a keeper, a human vessel who must willingly accept the thread, becoming the gate's guardian. That person would forever bear the burden. Anchored between this world and the darkness beneath, Lenora's child had been the first half-human, half-thing cursed to eternal watch, and the cycle demanded a successor. My father's warning suddenly made agonizing sense. He had fled to avoid becoming that keeper, but fate had led me here that night. I prepared the ritual in the cellar beneath the house. I placed the doll on the altar. I wrapped the black thread around my wrist, feeling it pulse against my skin, a heartbeat that was not my own. Now lit candles in a circle, and with trembling hands, began the incantation Nathaniel had copied from the forbidden texts. The house answered immediately. Walls seemed to close in. The air thickened with whispers, the voices of the lost echoing from the well below. Suddenly, the well's darkness surged upward like a tide. From its depths rose a shadowed figure tall, formless, but with glowing eyes that pierced the gloom. The thread calls, it said, voice like grinding stone. The gatekeeper returns. My heart hammered, but I held the thread tight. I accept, I whispered. Pain exploded through my arm as the thread tightened, burning like a brand. I gasped, sweat pouring, but I did not falter. The figure reached out, and I felt a coldness seep into my bones, a deep hunger that pressed against my mind. One left, dud. One taken. The world shuddered, and then silence. The candles guttered back to life. The figure was gone. The doll lay still, but the thread had vanished from my wrist. I was alone. I staggered to my feet, heart pounding with exhaustion and something else. Something. Like relief, the house seemed quieter. The oppressive weight I had carried for weeks had lifted, replaced by a stillness that was almost kind. But I knew better. I was now tied to Graymire in a way. I could never escape. The keeper of darkness, the gate, bound to the house and its secrets, tethered to the well and whatever waited beneath the house, seemed changed, not by the morning light nor the passing of days, but by something unseen and eternal woven into its bones and shadows, as if the very air whispered a secret only I now carried. The black thread was gone from my wrist, vanished. Like a dream at dawn, but I felt its presence beneath my skin, an aching tether that pulsed with every beat of my heart. I was no longer merely Edward Harrow. I was the keeper, the bridge between worlds. Days passed, or perhaps weeks I lost all sense of time beneath Graymire's weight. The portraits in the hallways watched with hollow eyes. The house itself seemed to breathe in slow, patient rhythms. The whispers from the well had ceased. The music box no longer played its haunting lullaby on its own. Even the air felt lighter, but the price was clear. Every night, as the house settled, I felt a pull toward the cellar, the well. Drawn by the thread I no longer held, compelled to watch and listen. I saw, in the flickering shadows, shapes move beneath the stone floor twisted. I formed things that stirred but could not rise. Their hunger was endless, but their prison held. Lenora's portrait returned, hanging above the hearth in the study. Her eyes were closed again, lips sealed not with stitches, but with peace. She watched over the house, and in her painted hand was a single black thread that no longer dangled or trembled. It was still. One evening, as dusk bled through the stained glass, Bledsoe approached me quietly in the study. His eyes held a rare softness. "You bear the burden now, Edward," he said. "The house is chosen. It always chooses." I nodded, exhaustion folding into resolve. What happens next? He gestured toward the well beneath the house. You watch, you wait, and you guard. For the darkness always stirs, and the thread is never truly broken. I glanced at the portrait. Lenora's painted hand was still extended, offering the silent thread an eternal reminder of sacrifice and sacrifice's cost. The house was no longer a prison, but a vigil, and I was its keeper. I sit now by the hearth, writing this to those who might come after, those who might inherit the cursed blood of the Harrows. Know this: the darkness beneath Greymire is old. It hungers, it whispers in the thread. It waits for a chance to speak again. But so long as the keeper remains, the gate stays closed. One left, or one taken. A Harrow must always remain. Now that you've walked the shadowed halls of Greymire and faced the darkness beneath, the question remains: what would you sacrifice to protect the ones you love? Will you break the thread, risking the unknown? Or will you become the keeper, bound forever to the shadows? If the ashen portrait has stirred your soul and chilled your spine, don't let the story end here. Share your thoughts, your fears, and your theories. Dive deeper into the mystery. And if you dare, bring others into this haunting tale, because some stories don't just end. They wait for their next keeper. Are you ready to take the thread?